The theme for today's discussion is broad enough that it can cover everything under the sun, everything in the universe. And what I propose is to lay before you a perspective that comes from the tradition of yoga. You are all familiar with yoga as an exercise, a means of improving health, a means of developing concentration, or even a means of healing. But the body of yogic knowledge is much broader. And in India, it represents a tradition which is, in many ways, mirrors the approach of science. That it is not a belief system, but rather an exploration of reality and of the human potential. Over the last about 10,000 years, in continuity, unbroken continuity, many mystics, yogis, and sages exploring the domain of and the experience of reality have gathered together a body of knowledge and experience and developed a technology which is a technology of consciousness. We are familiar with modern science's explorations of matter and the development of technology that allows you to master matter and material processes. But this is a technology that allows you to develop mastery of your own awareness and your own innate human potential. So what I propose to present is a perspective that comes from this body of knowledge. We will look at what we are made of and how the human individuality and personality works from a yogic perspective, and what it represents for our journey of life and the transition across lives. We will look at its aspects from a perspective of health, from a higher perspective of potential, which broadly go into paranormal capacities that human beings have, and also look at its implications in our day-to-day life when we work under conditions of extreme stress and pressure. So the first important idea that I will put forward is that observing a human being, we recognize that we are not just this body. Modern science is almost exclusively focused on what we would call the gross physical body. Gross because it is dense and crude, but we have finer, subtler layers which also are a form and a body. And so we make a distinction in the yogic tradition between the gross body and the subtle body. But I'm going to touch upon this from a perspective which also includes the explorations of modern science and its cutting-edge experiments. There was a series of experiments conducted in about 60 years ago in Russia by a scientist by the name Kirlian. And so the technique he developed is still called Kirlian photography, where the human hand is placed on a photographic plate under high voltage and high frequency. And the resulting image shows not only the form of the hand, but around the hand it shows like a glowing plasmic extension, which we call the aura. What was interesting was that as they took photos of different people, they found this aura extension changed according to the mood, the psychological state, thoughts and emotions of a person. It was also highly influenced by the biological internal states as they related to the emotions. And so over a period of many decades, the knowledge and the technology was refined until they were able to conclude that in fact, there is an extension well beyond the physical body that is being photographed by this method, and that represents us. I will give a dramatic experiment whose evidence you can find even on the internet in the form of photographs. They took a leaf from a tree, placed it on this device and took a photo, and you could see not only the leaf, the aura of the leaf, but also the fine, subtle channels of energy flowing in the leaf, like lines that typically you will see in maps of acupuncture. And that's a very nice picture. Next, they cut through the leaf. and took a photo again. And this time you could see in the photo that the physical tissue of the leaf was cut, but the larger aura extension was completely intact. You're photographing the subtle form, the subtle extension of the leaf. And then as they watched through a series of images, that aura extension began to fade out until it collapsed to the physical form of the leaf. Now this has extraordinary implications when you think about it. One of the implications is that people who have had their limbs cut by accident, or injuries, they still experience, as you know, what is called a phantom limb effect. That they feel now their missing hand is itching and they want to scratch it, except they can't feel the physical body. And it's a big problem. How do you deal with that? Because it's so irritating. You have no way of touching it. Of course, the biologist will say it's just ripples in the brain. But from the yogic perspective, you would say, well, there is there is still a subtle hand. That's the thing which is feeling the itch. And there must be some way to be able to deal with it. So this is one of the examples, many such examples of scientific explorations which confirm these principles. But we start with the idea that this body we have is only one of several layers. In the yoga tradition, we speak of 5 bodies. The first 3 of which we are conscious, the other 2 we are almost unaware of entirely. Let's focus on the first 3. You have a gross body. What is it that animates this gross body? What makes the organs work? What makes the cells grow or die? And we observe that there is a drive of energy that pushes and molds everything and makes everything work. And the energy is not just a vague, unformed energy. The energy itself flows in very specific forms and structures. And if those channels of energy flow are somehow blocked or they are disconnected, then it affects the physical health, because now the biology does not get its feeder energy that sustains its processes. And a lot of this knowledge is captured in the science of acupuncture or acupressure, where they map the energy flows and then play with those. There's a dramatic video of acupuncture experts in China who did something to a patient who was to undergo open heart surgery. Instead of using conventional anesthetics which are pumped into the bloodstream to knock out the mind and to make the person unconscious, they stuck a series of needles at different parts of the body and twirled the needles until the entire region of the chest became numb. And after that, they put a piece of cardboard so the fellow cannot see what's happening on his chest. And all the rest of the open heart surgery took place with the patient completely conscious. The numbness created only by the twirling of needles stuck at specific points, which are not even connected to the physical nervous system. They belong to the acupuncture nervous system, which is an energy system and not a physical system. So there are many maps you might find in different places of how the energy flows. But what is interesting is there are energy systems which can be tapped through needles, but the energy flows can also be tapped by changing the body positions. So one of the things we find is there's a major energy flow in the arm which divides into the 5 fingers. And if you connect different fingers in different ways, you're actually creating circuit connections of the energy flows. And if you change the connections in certain patterns, you can actually modify your psychological and even physiological states. And this is one of the things you will find in the yoga tradition. People who sit, for example, to concentrate will sit with the fingers like this. Have you ever done that yourself, perhaps? And you're taught perhaps by your parents, oh, when you sit to concentrate, you meditate, you hold your fingers like this. And if you ask them why, they will tell you, well, that's how I was taught. But there's no simple answer given. In fact, I'll just touch upon how it works here. The 5 fingers represent 5, in the yoga tradition, the 5 elements which you're familiar with. Here, the thumb is the fire principle, the air principle, ether, earth, and water. So when, for example, you connect the fire principle with the fire principle is also aligned to your willpower. And connecting with the air principle, which is the expansiveness of your awareness, you're as if limiting your awareness, focusing it, and bringing it into alignment and concentration. So keeping your fingers like this with the other fingers together is a posture, mudra we say in Sanskrit, which automatically creates a ripple effect in your energy body that compels your awareness to become stable, still, and centered. And so it's a useful tool. You don't need it. You could do the same by just willing your awareness directly, but it's a tool. You're tapping into the energy circuit of the system. As a variation, let me show you how this being the air principle, the index finger, it also relates to all of the biological processes which involve expansion and gaseous processes. So if you have too much flatulence, then they teach you the mudra of suppressing the air principle by compressing the index finger with the thumb. And if you sit like this, it will reduce or control flatulence, for example. Okay. So this is just to show you how there is in fact an energy body which has physical ramifications which you can tap into by physical processes. And in this way you will understand what people do when they learn to control their breath in the exercises called pranayam, or even in certain postures which we call asanas, which is what is normally categorized as yoga here when you go to a yoga studio. They have enormous implications in the energy body and can change your health, even revitalize the entire system just by doing certain what appear to be very simple postures and breathing exercises. But behind that is this quite a complex science. The third body is recognized when we look at what controls the energy flows. What is it that holds all the processes of the biology and the energy in harmony? When you actually observe a single cell in the body under the microscope, we notice a single cell has about 10,000 different processes simultaneously ongoing, spanning the entirety of the cell. And all of these 10,000 processes need to be synchronized, held in harmony. What is the intelligence inside the cell which does it? In fact, the cell can be likened to an entire country or a whole city. You have the outer peripheral wall, and the wall itself involves an intelligence to allow only the raw materials that the cell needs and to keep everything else out. Anything poisonous and harmful should be kept out. Anything which it needs should be taken only up to a degree and not in excess, so that you do not overload the cell. On the other hand, internally within the cell, there's a transport system to take the raw material to where it's actually required. And as a byproduct of the cellular processes, there's a waste material which by the transport system must be brought out to the cell walls to be expelled. Now, just this simple process, you can imagine what a complexity it entails. And then inside the cells, all the processing systems are so complex. There are also the energy producers, the power source, which are generating energy for the rest of the cells to work. And in the midst of this is what we call the DNA structure. The DNA structure appears to be passive. It's folded up inside the cell, remember? And yet it seems to control everything in the cells. And how does it do that? And so today there's a whole aspect of genetics that we call epigenetics. It's the interface between the genetic structure, which appears to be fixed, and the actual processes in the cells. And now we discover something fascinating. The epigenetic processes are two-way processes. So the gene structure is influencing the cell processing, but on the other hand, what happens in the cells is then mapped back into the genes. So with experiments with rats, we notice that if a rat is put through extreme stress, its progeny inherits the stress response. Let's say the rat has been put through stress, and the stress is associated with a certain image or a certain sound. The children of the rats now inherit that response. Whenever they see that image or hear that sound, they tend to get stressed. What makes for that transmission, which is a learned behavior? It's not a change in the DNA. It's part of the epigenetic processes. And so we're discovering that our understanding of the genes is very limited. And we're rapidly growing to recognize this dynamism and an intelligence that operates, which is not static, which is involved in the life experience and somehow links it to the core and actually transmits it through the hereditary system. So this third layer is the intelligence, the awareness which coordinates all these complex activities, not only within a single cell, but across the cells, across the organs in the body. Now, when you look at a patient who is in the hospital and we say, oh, his sugar level's gone up, there's a whole chain reaction that follows. Normally, in a healthy person, automatically there's a corrective response to the biology to bring it back in balance. And there's a continuous dynamism of all kinds of things swinging up and down, but always held in balance. Now, this patient is in the hospital because that dynamic balance is somehow messed up. It's not able to correct itself. And what does the doctor do? He only introduces certain further chemicals to try to help the body to correct itself. The moment the body gets back its rhythm, you say, you're well now, you can go home. What's the actual reality of our sugar level in the body? You've just eaten food, your sugar is spiked. And the body does not bother with it. It's fine. It'll come down. We'll bring it down as needed. Right now it needs to be up. And so there's a whole dynamic fluctuation of every single substance in the bloodstream, but always held in balance with an extraordinary intelligence. So complex that we cannot map it even. We can only observe certain relationships and make certain general empirical statements. And all of this is held together by an intelligence which is aware of the biology processes, the energy processes, and knows how to bring it into harmony. And none of this is part of our conscious intelligence. So we are actually looking at a third layer, which is the awareness and intelligence, of which our conscious intelligence is one tiny part, the tip of the iceberg. The bulk of the rest of the awareness and intelligence is held in this layer that we will call in the yogic system the conscious body. So let me use the Sanskrit terms. The gross physical is the annamaya, which is the food body. The next layer is the energy body, pranamaya, which is the life force body, chi, ki, prana, equivalent terms. And the third layer, manomaya, which is the mind, mental awareness body. The other two are much finer and they represent our spiritual potential. We may touch upon it later if necessary, but we'll focus for now on these three. What is interesting is all these three bodies interpenetrate and are therefore interdependent. If you do something to the gross physical body, its ripple effect affects your emotions and your mind. Equally, if you think about something strongly, it affects the energy body and the gross physical body. Or if you're emotionally disturbed, it affects your mind and your gross body. Now that's pretty obvious, isn't it? That's what makes for us to be an individual, self-aware, and a unit that's functioning as an independent unit. But recognize that each of these three has its own particular requirements for good health. Each of these three has its own particular needs and drives and instincts. And each of these three is fundamentally a different and independent substance and layer. Once we recognize this, then a lot of the difficulties of life become easier to manage, including managing stress, which we will touch upon later, but other things which we thought impossible or which we experienced but could not explain now become more evident. As an example, the energy body, being primarily made of energy, is influenced by any energy in the environment. Just as your gross body is influenced by the physical circumstances, your energy body is influenced by energy in the environment. So if you enter a space where a large number of people are gathered with excitement, there's a demonstration, a political demonstration going on, for example, or there is a rock concert that's going on and people are jumping and screaming in excitement. If you enter that space, or even if you approach it, that power and agitation of the energy hits you and even enters you and seizes you. You will feel yourself in the grip of this excitement, unable to modify, unable to control yourself. And you might find yourself starting to jump and scream and shout. Afterwards, when you've moved away from that space and the energy connection has broken, you will wonder, why did I behave like that? Why did I say that? Why did I do that? It's so unlike me. But you're not conscious that at that point it was not you. You'd just been possessed by the energy which was not yours. Something more refined but equivalent happens when you're dealing with people. You meet somebody and he gives you a strong grip, handshake, a pump of energy, and you feel yourself suddenly perked up and energetic. There's actually a transmission of energy that's taking place in that contact. Or the reverse. You're feeling great this morning, you met somebody, you had perhaps a brief interaction, and you come away and you find yourself depleted, as if deflated, a balloon which has lost all its power. And what happened? I don't know. I just met this person and came away, and it's like everything's gone. Sometimes it may involve a conversation, but that's irrelevant. It's the contact of the energy that takes place. Or you notice somebody at a distance. Even before you have come together and met, you feel that this person is upset, or the person is depressed, or something about him which feels out of sorts, and you might choose to avoid. What did you feel at that distance? I was speaking this morning to a few people in the hospitality industry, and one of the examples I gave them was, you see someone coming in through the door and you know this will be a problem customer. And it works out that way. How do you know it? You sense on some level. What level is that? It's actually your energy body that senses the person's energy. Because your energy body, unlike the gross physical body, is not limited to this physical space. It extends well beyond. And it's even fluid in its expanse. It can expand out, it can narrow down. When you are, for example, in a situation that requires you to command a group of people or a large space, your energy body automatically expands to include that space. When you want to be unseen and avoid being recognized and want to sneak in somehow through a group, you shrink and somehow people don't notice you. There's a very interesting example from the life of Marilyn Monroe. You know that she had this extraordinary effect on people, as is the case with most charismatic people. So one of her friends narrates how they went shopping. Marilyn Monroe is going shopping and no one notices her. And at some point she tells her friend, now watch. And she shakes herself up and suddenly everybody around perks up and turns and looks at her. Hey, there's Marilyn Monroe. What did she just do? She had shrunk her energy, she opened it out and reached out and connected. And it had that effect. Now there are people who do it consciously, as she did. Most of us do it unconsciously. But if you had a clairvoyant sight, that is the power to see on a subtle level, you'd actually see around people this form of the aura and see colors, see shapes and forms in it which represent the way the energy flows and the state of emotions and even illness. One of the things you see in the aura is a dark patch in a certain part. And you know, aha, this is where the fellow is going to catch an illness soon. And it often takes a few weeks or a month before it hits the gross body and becomes an illness in that part. So let me explain this a little bit. You notice when you have strong emotions, they affect you physically. You're angry, where does it hit you? Below, in the lower abdomen, isn't it? When you're happy, where do you feel it? Generally in the upper part of the chest. Center of the chest often. When you fear, where does that hit you? Belly and in the bowels. So when you're very afraid, it's like your bowels, you lose control of your bowels. They feel loose, they feel fluid. Now what happens if you experience anger again and again and again? It's almost like there's a knot that forms in the stomach region, which becomes a state of tension after a while, until it acquires a physical character and begins to affect physical processes in the abdomen. Remember, all biological processes are controlled by the energy flow. If the energy becomes knotted, then the physical process will be to that degree blocked or distorted. And the result is, this person has now developed a habit of, or has developed an illness of acidity, bile. And you will notice the connection. Anger does something there which creates a kind of a heat in the stomach. And that is what represents in the physical body as excess of acid or bile. If you correct the energy knot, again it takes a few weeks to ripple down to the gross body before that particular habit in the gross body changes. Now, if you had a habit of anger, you can take all the antacid you want. It will suppress the symptoms but not solve the problem. And in order to solve the problem, you need to go up one step to the psychological root cause of it. Another interesting connection that I will relate you to is the diseases of the lungs, such as tuberculosis, which involve an infection in certain extreme parts of the lungs. You're breathing normally, but the edge, the extreme lower portions of the lungs tend to have stale air. And that's where the infections catch easily. But the most common illness with a psychological connection is the certain forms of tuberculosis, for example, which are the extreme result of a state of depression. If you're unhappy, if you're sad, if you feel that you've lost sense of purpose in life and your energies begin to deflate, it's somewhere here that one feels it. And in the physical system, it affects the lower part of the lungs, which are no more fully involved in the complete breathing. And that's when the stagnant air begins to accumulate, leading eventually to certain forms of infection. The moment you know somebody has tuberculosis, observe carefully and you'll notice, for the last 1 year at least, the person has been somewhat depressed or has lost sense of interest in life, has felt purposeless. You can deal with the tuberculosis, but you must deal with this root cause also at the same time. So I'm showing you here a relationship between the energy body and the gross physical body, because that's where the health imprint, the health impact of this is felt maximally. Behind that, in the mental body again, you have grooves. Let's say a person is stubborn. You've seen people who are stubborn? You will notice something in the body is rigid. They walk in a certain way which is a bit fixed. It's like either the shoulders or in the waist, some part of the movement of the body is no more fluid. It's no more harmonious. It's no more flexible. And the stubbornness in the mind reflects itself in the energies, creating a kind of a block, which reflects in the gross body, which becomes a rigidity. How do you correct it? Well, you can go all the way to the top, change the stubbornness, much harder to do with most people, but it's possible. Sometimes a crisis in life will break that stubbornness, force you to be more flexible, and the biology follows. Or you could go the reverse way. Make the body plastic. Take up the practice of what you call yoga, asanas, the postures of yoga. Make the body flexible, and the result will be the energy flows will get deblocked. And as a consequence, you'll find your thinking becomes clearer. Because these things are vicious cycles. A blockage of rigidity in the thought creates blockage in energy, which feeds back on the blockage of thought. You've broken the vicious cycle by physical change. It's the reason why what appears to be so simple, you do a few stretches, you feel good, has such a massive shift in your awareness, not only energetically on the health, but in your thoughts and even the clarity of your mind. Those who actually take up these practices, they discover within a month or so, the mind becomes clearer, calmer, and freer. So you can see how this has massive implications in your capacity to cope with the stresses of life. We will still deal with the question of stress from a different perspective later on, but when you see in connection of these three layers of the bodies, you can see how one influences the other, and modifying any one of them can be a starting point. But if you work on all three simultaneously, that's the most effective way of changing anything within yourself. Now, this is the model first that I'm placing before you, 3 bodies. We've already looked at certain health implications. We've looked at certain paranormal processes. You sense people at a distance. But there are other implications also. At the level of the mind, for example, if you have a strong thought, that also affects, because the other person's mental body and your mental body are as if in a continuum. Look at it this way. The gross body limits are defined by the substance of your body. Your energy body is larger, wider, more flexible. The mind body extends even further. Consider, if I ask you right now, think of somebody whom you love very much, who's not here right now. Perhaps a parent, a child, a friend, a spouse. And think about them intensely. And very quickly you begin as if to enter in a kind of a connection, as if in your mind or in your heart you feel connected, you feel close. Now this actually happens every time we make a phone call. You speak to somebody. Of course, it's different when you have a business call, but when you have a strong emotional connection, you feel it most easily. You speak to somebody, and after a while you close your eyes when you're listening to the person, as if you're connecting and getting into the person, feeling what they feel, feeling what they think. And the person could be on the other side of the earth, but the connection is as if they were right next to you. And this is possible because in your mental awareness, in fact, you are extended and part of, sensitive to the entire continuum of awareness of the mind substance that extends everywhere. That's how we feel and know each other. Especially when there's a strong emotional, energetic connection, the thought contact is more easy because you're tuning in and separating from the clutter of the thoughts in the environs. That's a common experience most of you who are parents would have had, that you suddenly feel inside you that something is wrong with your child. Something is not okay. And then you look at the child, you ask a few questions and you discover, oh yes, there's a problem there. But you got the sense of it well before. There are very interesting studies involving dogs, and they're often more close to us than other human beings. So there's a video camera set in the house monitoring the dog. The owner of the dog, its parent effectively, is sitting in his office, and suddenly the owner says, it's time to go now, and he starts winding up. The moment he's shifted his orientation to want to go home, you see on the video the dog gets up and now starts looking at the window or the door. As the owner is driving home, the dog gets excited and starts moving around the house. When the owner turns into the road that comes to the house, the dog rushes to the door and either starts scratching, tapping, or barking. And within a minute or so, the owner has reached the house. Now, this sort of thing has been done again and again. How do you explain it? And the only explanation you have is that we are in fact connected. The reality is we are connected to everything in the universe. But we are more connected to the things that interest us. We are most connected to the things that we love because we put energy there and want to build that bond. But we are also most connected to the things that we hate. Because hatred after all is just kind of a negative love. I love to hate that guy. I love to think about him all the time with feelings of hatred. But I love it, right? In fact, there's no such thing as hatred. It's just love that has got perverted in a strange way. And those are the things which bind you. And just as someone you love is connected to you, someone you hate is also connected to you. And through that connection, you're exchanging negative energy, which messes up your life. You can choose to cut that cord. Free yourself from that hatred, and the cord fades out. Initially, it keeps pulling you back. Have you had this experience? You want to forget something, It keeps bothering you. It's like the thought gets into you, tugs at your heart, and provokes a reaction within you. The reality is this, that every time you have a strong thought or a strong emotion, it forms a unit, a bundle of energy that is released into the environment. Again, this can be seen clairvoyantly. And when a repeated series of thoughts or energy forms are thrown out, a connection, a sustained habit forms. That's the reason why when you break up after a romantic affair, it's extremely painful. It's like something feels as if being torn from you. Most of you would have gone through this at some time or other, at least in your teenage. You form a bond of connection, of affection, sometimes very intense, and then things go bad and you break up. And you feel this thing like a cord being torn apart, something being uprooted from within your heart. For a while you feel a hollowness and an emptiness which you want to fill somehow. All of these descriptions are actually visible to the clairvoyant sight. You can see an energy bond literally being uprooted. You feel the fibers of your body being torn in that. And it takes a while to heal. Just as the gross body takes a while to heal, even the subtle body takes a while to heal. So our thoughts, our emotions have a reality. They belong to the domain of a subtler grade of reality. And they have an enormous impact on circumstances, even as upon us, our health and our relationships. So if you put out repeatedly a positive thought, the energy bundle of the positive thought will tend to go out and try to actualize itself. If you put out a negative thought, that will tend to actualize. So when you have fear, what if I have an accident? What if I lose this? What if that thing fails? And you keep brooding over it. You're creating an energy bundle that goes out to try to actualize itself. And in a sense, what we fear, we attract and make to happen. So in your work, in your personal life, you have to be very careful what you think and feel. Do not build up habits of negative thinking because they will tend to happen by your own compulsion. You made it happen. Instead, when you have to deal with negative options, you look at it, okay, what if this happens? Okay, I'll do this. And then you don't think about it again. The brooding is what gives it energy. And the same in terms of your relationships. Most of us have had this experience in life that we suddenly found ourselves in a bad relationship with somebody for almost no reason at all, or for something trivial. Someday a person said a word in anger or upset. He may have forgotten because he was just upset for a different reason. You hold it in your heart and then you brood about it. Why did he say that? What a nasty, mean fellow. I've done so much for him. And it continues to bother you. It pops up in your sleep. In the middle of the night, you wake up and start wondering or worrying about it. And all of that is energy you're throwing at him. And the other person is thinking of you, and the energy connection brings with it this junk, painful, negative energy. And thinking of you, he suddenly feels negative, which is your energy. And he feels negative and throws negative energy back. And you enter very quickly into a kind of a vicious cycle. What started as a tiny misunderstanding builds up into a full-blown conflict before you know it. And if you're conscious of it, you feel it building up, you break the cycle. Refuse to get into a negative engagement. Instead, consciously send out positive, loving, caring thoughts, compassion, neutrality, if not anything else. Even against the people whom you love to hate the most. You put a neutrality at best, and you'll find the vicious cycle breaks and even may open the way to a positive opportunity. The person who once was in conflict with you may end up even becoming a good friend because you took the trouble to build a bond of positivity. Now, I've shifted the whole discussion to a level of engagement in our social life where almost nothing of what we are doing physically, speaking or doing matters. The whole thing is taking place on a psychological level. And it's so vivid, so real, that it determines often our behavior at a physical level. Most people are unconscious to such a degree The thought comes, the emotion comes, hits them, and they behave, thinking it's their choice. And there are very simple experiments one can do to demonstrate this. And people who have that capacity can actually do that. I've seen a friend of mine, anywhere on the road, you could point out a dog, he would stare at the dog, and within about 30 seconds, the dog would get up, turn around, and start barking at him. And actually, it's possible for almost any one of us to do it. But we're doing this unconsciously all the time when we throw negative or positive energies. So become conscious of your thoughts, of your emotions, not only for their impact on your health, but also on the impact on your relationships and on your circumstances. Now, this power of creativity to influence circumstances is ours. It's a gift. Most of us here are professionals, perhaps, or are related to certain professions. And you know that if you want to do something, if you want to aim for a particular outcome, you have to first start by conceiving it. And the more detail that you can bring into the conception, the more clearly you can form the outcome. The more you're able to put into it your personal energy, the more you're able to energize that concept, that idea. And then the rest of your physical efforts only go to support it. Now, this is so effective that there are many examples of this where people have put forward a strong intention and materially circumstances begin to align themselves to make this happen. In practice, if you surround yourself, if your aura is full of positivity, it will tend to attract positive energies and positive circumstances. If you surround yourself with a negative energy, it will tend to attract those things. You'll notice when you enter a room, let's say there's a party going on, 100 people perhaps, you enter the room, your first instinct is you scan through. And in your quick scan, a few individuals pop up. This. It's that quick. It happens instantaneously. We're not even conscious of it. And automatically you tend to be attracted to those 2 or 3 people because you feel the resonance, you feel the comfort of a certain similarity or attraction, isn't it? And these are the things which really determine our interests and relationships. There's a very interesting study that shows when a group of, let's say, students comes to a college or university and they're sitting in a first group meeting, often the people sitting next to each other will become the best of friends. Something like 80% of the cases, 2 people who are sitting next to each other in the first sitting, which was completely random apparently, happened to end up being the best of friends for years thereafter. The reality is this: none of the sitting was random. As you walk in and choose a place to sit, there's this automatic filtration taking place on your subliminal levels. You feel this comfortable, that uncomfortable, and you end up being somewhere where you feel the alignments to be energetically comfortable. Why? Because you are already birds of a feather, so to say. You're already similar energetically. This, once you become aware of these things, you'll find a whole different world opens to you in your life. Now, all of this begs the question, where is it all leading? Where are we going with this? From childhood through adulthood, we're struggling to develop our individuality, develop the capacities of our personality, and it's on all 3 levels. Your body grows, your emotional nature becomes more mature, your mind becomes more skillful, intelligent, penetrating in insight. Once you've reached a certain point of individuation, you're now an individual, you're an independent adult, then begins your real life journey. Some people take a little longer, some a little shorter, in different layers. And it's not just your body's growth. The biology growth is pretty much fixed by the time you're 21 or 22. But the other levels may still be maturing. But all of that leads to the formation of an individuality. For what? What happens after that? You realize your pursuit of life is driven by certain things that you feel from within spontaneously to be more interesting than other things which you feel less interesting. Ask yourself, what determines that? What are you really chasing? You're chasing what's interesting. So let's say you went to a particular activity which you found interesting. As a teenager, you found your parties to be very interesting. First time it was fascinating, it was so wonderful, so exciting. The second time it was okay, the third time it was been there, done that. Fourth time you say no thanks. What happened there? And it's the same thing in our adult life. Certain things are interesting and after a while they just fade out. What happened there? What changes within you? The initial novelty always gives you an experience of, I'm learning something, I'm growing. And after that, the growth potential that the circumstance offers is finished. That's all it could give you. I will go deeper into this idea. Consider what happens when you go to an activity, let's say a lecture, a music concert, or an interaction with a group. After a particular activity, you come back and you say, oh, that was fascinating. Another case, you go somewhere, different lecture, music, or activity, you come back and you say, that was boring. What's the difference between these two? What is it internally, subjectively, that you feel that makes this interesting and that boring? And if you observe, where you go back, where you go in as you were, you come out the same person. That was boring. You go in here, you come out a different person, changed. That was interesting. Effectively, growth equals interesting. Every time when through an activity you experience growth, you find it interesting. So when you went for your first, let's say, party, it was great fun, you came back saying, I want to have a party every day. Because you learned something, you grew in certain ways, you're not even conscious of what. But a few steps down the line, there's no more that it can give you. You've learned and drawn from it what you could, now you're looking for something more. What are you looking for? You're looking for life experiences that will give you the sense of growth. And what does it feel like when you have growth? What's happening to you subjectively? Something that within me was as if asleep wakes up and emerges. When you say, I have grown, what has grown? It's something which was inside, latent as a potential, as a possibility, now has come forward and is now an active part of your awareness, of your personality. Isn't it? It's not something you've taken from outside. The outside is only a trigger to draw out some innate capacity. It could be just knowledge, it could be an energetic power, or it could be a special skill that emerges. But when you look deeply enough in this way, the conclusion you come to, all experiences of life are valuable to the extent they help you draw out your innate potential, growth, in a direction which to you is fulfilling. Now, I could take you through a whole training program to give you the skill for playing guitar beautifully. And while you'll enjoy it up to a point, after a point you'll say, but you know what, I would rather be doing something else which is more aligned to my nature. So there's a kind of a template you see, and each one of us has a different template. There's a template where certain directions of activity give you more fulfillment in growth than other directions, which also give you, it's something interesting, but after a point you say, I'd rather do something else. That template is, we will use the term, your nature, your particular individual nature. In Sanskrit we say svabhava. You've heard this term perhaps, those who are familiar with the Sanskrit language. But that particular template determines your innate drives, your swadharma, your innate motivation, your innate truth. That's the term in Sanskrit, dharma, swadharma. And each one is unique. And when you pursue your innate drive, which is aligned to your innate map, so to say, imprint, you have the greatest satisfaction. Even if in terms of external causes you seem to fail. You've had this experience where you did something and you really put yourself in it. It didn't work out, but you still look back and say, I enjoyed it so much. It's not what others measure in terms of success, but your fulfillment in actually doing that. And generally, when you take a line of that kind, that becomes your most fulfilling career. When you do things where even if you fail, you'll find it worthwhile to have done what you did. That's your ideal career. That's the thing which gives you the most satisfaction. And because you enjoy it, because it's your deepest sense of growth, inevitably you will succeed in it. Even if initially you pass through failures, they're just learning opportunities. If on the other hand you do something which is contrary to your nature, you may seem to succeed. I win every time that I'm able to, let's say, play the lottery. I win the money, but does it give me the satisfaction? That activity does not give you the satisfaction really. You're successful from a certain perspective, but it's not it. It's something like that. You may be doing something which gives you, in the eyes of others, the appearance of success, but eventually deep inside you, you'll say, I'd rather do something else. At best, you might accept that as a compromise to build your basic stability of finances. But after that, you'll move elsewhere. When the 9/11 attacks happened in New York, and quite a large number of people, because of the timing of the attack, quite a large number of people survived because they went to the office late. I have a friend who actually was delayed that morning. His breakfast was late. He missed his train, and he arrived there 20 minutes late, thinking that I'm going to get beaten up by my bosses for coming late. And he realized that he had just saved his life because his breakfast got delayed. You will say, fortuitous, grace, coincidence, whatever. But all those people who survived that attack, the shock of it made them review, what am I doing with my life? The same people who were earning large sums every day on what was effectively power gambling, high stress activity, suddenly with that shock asked, is that it? Is it so fragile? What am I here for? What do I really want? It was interesting to see a large number of the stock market players left that job, went into the countryside and took up things which they wanted to do from their childhood. That is indicative, you see. There was always behind something which for them was the deeper fulfillment, but somehow their lives took them in a different path. They got sucked into something and the shock awoke what was more important. I'm coming to this because it relates to something of the deeper sense of who we are. And this is the source of our deepest motivations and drives. And this term which I described earlier, your innate drive, swadharma. And the form, the imprint of your nature, swabhava. What determines that? We're coming now into space where I will describe it from the perspective of yoga, and rather than trying to validate it in terms of external forms of research, I would rather ask you to validate in terms of your own intuitive feel, what feels right. In the yogic perspective, we describe it thus, that when we choose to take birth, and it's always a choice, it's as if we come with a sense of purpose, a sense of direction of growth that we want to experience. And often, though not always, we are attracted to an environment that is conducive to that kind of growth. Often we choose parents for a particular quality of nourishment that we will receive in our upbringing and in our life experience. Sometimes it comes with a package deal. It has other elements which you may or may not value, or you may even find detestable. But you came for a particular thing which attracted you into that space. And the journey of your life really then is along the broad lines of what you intended in your free choice. In that sense, that's your destiny. If somebody is sufficiently perceptive, you can observe a child, they say in India, if you observe a child while still in the cradle, you can see what direction his journey will take. It's not entirely untrue. You will see children who are very quiet, relaxed, and then you will see children who are active, who want to do. And that temperament will actually develop into their adult life. But more profoundly, you can observe the personality of a child in teenage and pretty much describe what direction his life journey will take. Because already by then it's taking a form. But that innate push which is driving you is coming from that inner core, the one that chose to take birth. And the journey of life is really a journey of fulfillment of that intent. And at the end of the life, you look back and you say, well, this was worth it. So many times you'll hear grandparents, aged people say, I've lived a full life. I did everything that I wanted to do and I'm fully satisfied. There's nothing more left that I really want or need. It's around that time that one begins a kind of a consolidation and the preparation to make the next transition. And in the first separation from the body, what you call death, you must understand what it means really, is you never die. It's your body that you shed and you say, okay, this body is unable to support what more I need and it's time to leave it. So in the text, in the sacred text of the Bhagavad Gita, you'll find this description of the clothes. When you grow, your clothes begin to be a little too small for you. If you continue to grow, eventually your clothes start ripping apart, isn't it? So at that point you have to say, all right, I need to change clothes. So you drop your clothes and take on new ones more suited to your current form. Something like that is what we experience in the transition when we shed the body. There's always a point of choice. It's interesting to notice, if you read literature of people who had near-death experiences, there's a consistency across cultures and even across religious traditions. People around the world of any background of culture or religion have similar stories. At first, at the moment of the transition, there's like a flashback. You have a quick view of your whole life journey in a moment, in a fraction of a moment. And then a moment of choice. What do I want? Often they describe at the time of an accident. They're driving in a car, suddenly out of the corner of the eye they see something coming and wham! And momentarily it's as if time stops, flashback of life and the choice. And inevitably all near-death experiences, survivors will tell you, and they said, no, we have not finished our work. And then wham, the collision takes place and they survive. Sometimes with some disability or partial disability, but they survive. That moment of choice is a moment when the person, the you, true you, comes forward momentarily and reviews the situation and exercises the choice. Always at the time of leaving, there is the point of choice. Now the choice may be compelled upon you. The body is so badly damaged that I can't do much with it. Or it may be the body is damaged, but I'll still enjoy continuing in it. Which is often the case in people who have become in coma. Sometimes from accident or from some brain damage, they're in coma for a couple of decades even. And the person inside may say, well, this is an interesting experience. I'm quite comfortable here. Let's just enjoy it. I'm happy to just be. In some cases, they're able to hear and see things, sense things. In some cases, they're not, but they're just happy to be. Nice and warm and comfortable. Distantly, they feel emotions, voices, or thoughts of others. That's about it. The cases, for example, people who have been in coma for 20 or 30 years, suddenly getting up one day, fully conscious, and they say, well, I heard every single thing you people said, only I couldn't respond. Or there are equally people who were so deep in coma that they did not register the outer senses, but when they come back, they're just fine. Often the personality is much changed in the sense that the more kind, more loving. Something of the deeper characters come forward, and the outer hardened layers are as if dropped. So there is a choice always. But when the choice is made to shed the body, first is the dropping off of the gross body. And in the descriptions you will find of near-death experiences, they find themselves floating because the subtle body does not have weight. They're floating, they're moving around, they see people rushing on the body that's fallen, and they say, but that's not me, I'm here. So often that experience of separating from your body is quite liberating because you realize, I don't die. If any of you have ever had an out-of-body experience, which is not uncommon, that gives you a similar sense. You just wake up in the middle of your dream at night and you find your body on your bed and you can see things around you. You can walk through walls and go around, see things, meet people. Interestingly, in that state, when you meet somebody, their emotions and thoughts are felt directly without words. Because you're at that time in your subtle body, in your vital and mental layers, where you do not need the gross body words, you just feel the energy of another person and even their thoughts. So there's an interesting example which is documented by Dr. Raymond Moody in his book describing near-death experiences. He documents a patient who effectively died on the operating table for about 15 minutes and then was brought back to life. And he remembered the whole period of 15 minutes. So several descriptions. One of them involves this person finding himself floating around, wandering in the hospital, seeing things happen in other rooms, and later describing accurately all of them. Including one case where somebody wandering around went to the room where a child was being delivered, and he had a strong urge to put his head in the child's head. It was almost like a suction, a magnetic suction wanting to do that. And then he said, no, but my family is waiting for him. And he made the choice to refuse and came back. That's when they resuscitated him. And after he came back to awareness, he described what he saw, what happened there, and they checked, and that was one of the cases where the child was stillborn. What might have happened is he would have taken that body perhaps. It was an opportunity, a choice given, and that's it. Other cases where they've gone to other rooms, all of these can be easily validated to show that yes, there is this reality. But the case I'm coming to is very interesting because this person found himself free. And of course, the first thing you do is you start exploring your world on that level, in that body. And he finds himself attracted to his relatives, people he loves. And he goes, I think, to one of his relatives. And in that house is a little child who was known to be crying. He was about 6 months old, couldn't yet speak, and would cry all the time. And he comes to this child, and the child communicates with him. You see, the thought, emotion, communication does not need words because you are thoughts and emotions at that point. And the child shows him, look, my leg is twisted and I have pain here in the joint. And so this man tells him, look, there's no point crying because they can't understand what you're going through. So at least stop crying. And he says after a while the child stopped crying. Soon after he was resuscitated, he came back to his body. This is many hundred miles away. And then he narrates this. And then they verified with the family that in fact at that point the child abruptly stopped crying and he was just quiet. And then they took him to the doctor and discovered, yes, his leg had just got twisted, and they set it right, and after that the child was fine. It seems so simple. You meet somebody and you just know what they think, what they feel in the subtle body. That's really what's happening. In fact, that's what happens when we meet right now. Our subtle bodies register and sense each other instantaneously. But we're too busy and fixated on the gross body, and now we try to understand, what do you mean, what did you say? And we're missing all the communication that's taking place subliminally. So, I'm describing what happens when you leave the body. First you shed the gross body, and then there are these other layers, which are, remember, also sheaths, coverings. And those over time begin to kind of disintegrate equally as you disengage from them. In between, you experience the world, reality on those levels as you withdraw, until such time as you finally settle into what is the core of you. I'm going to take a few moments to elaborate on this. Do you remember when you were a student, when you had to prepare for an exam, how many hours you spent studying, learning things by heart? And then after you've gone through the exam, what remains within a few days, the whole thing is washed off. Nothing remains, right? What remains in you, though, is an overall imprint of all the things you tried to learn. If I ask you, do you remember your childhood, your years in school, your years in college, or your first job? What remains of that? Practically nothing, except a few essential elements which make you what you are today. Some deep learning, some shaping that took place in your personality, some profound shifts which define your individuality today. And today, as an adult, if you look back at your entire life and say, what of this is of value to you? Well, the food you had for breakfast 20 years ago has no meaning. Perhaps even the food you had for breakfast 10 days ago has no meaning, right? But the relationships and the things you absorb from the kinds of experiences you had, that stays. And now look back at your most painful experience of transition in your life. And you look back and say, yes, I learned so much from this. Sometimes the most difficult and the most painful experiences are also the greatest learning experiences forming your maturity today. And you look back and say, that was most valuable. However much I may have suffered during it, now I can look back and say, that was such a learning experience, isn't it? So that sum total of your learning experience is what remains with you. And as you disengage from your body and disengage from these layers, it's that which you absorb and which you are. There's a period which one can observe where the person withdraws and remains in a quiet state of, we use the word trance, assimilating, absorbing all the life experience. And then once again, when it's ready, turning around to look at the domain of life and say, what's the next adventure? What do I want? What do I really need? What do I want to experience? What's the growth that is most required? I'm going to ask you this question. If you had to do your whole life all over again, how would you want to do it? If you just think about it, it's obvious. What do you choose? You don't choose to repeat what you did, because that's done, you've learned. You choose to fill the part in your development where you feel the maximum lack, the gap, the thing missing to make you complete. That's what you want to focus on next, isn't it? And that's the sense, spontaneously the consciousness turns and says, this is what I want to develop, this is what I want to experience. And as it turns to the domain of form and life, it's attracted to the spaces where that kind of experience can be felt or had. The resonance that takes place in your overall feel. The same way that you're attracted to a person, I like this person, I like his vibes, it's familiar, it's comfortable. In the same way you turn to life, this space, this feeling, these people, I like this. And you're as if drawn to that. And of course, depending on the circumstances where human bodies can be taken up, there's an entry into that domain and a connection that takes place either before birth, during, or after birth. That is a fluid experience. The more mature souls can actually be in the environment while still the fetus is in formation. They can even preside over the formation of the fetus and infuse elements of their personality into the body that's being developed. And gradually, over a few days, weeks, or even months, and transitioning after birth, they fully enter and now have the human experience. Or otherwise, it may be at the time of birth, or even completing over a few days or weeks after. But the idea being, both the disengagement of separation and the re-engagement to re-enter life involve freedom and choice of the deepest core that is you. And this is a very important factor to keep in mind. The journey of life itself was a chosen journey. We chose to enter it for the possibilities of growth and experience that it offers to us. And we are free to experience differently over a period of time. In the personal experience, as you are able to concentrate and center yourself in your inmost core, you experience this. You become aware of the sense of immortality. You know that you are really free and you are there permanently. You are eternal. And the journey of past lives also can be either come into your awareness, or just the sense of freedom is enough that you have no more fear. You do what you have to do and you continue, and you will continue, and nothing can stop that. And that's a great freedom when you have that. But this center is where the deepest motivations of your life exist. Sri Aurobindo uses a vocabulary to describe this core. He calls it the psychic being, the inmost and true soul within us. And then there are many layers in our personality, all the way to the most superficial parts, where we are primarily driven by our desires, impulsions, reactions, and habits. And then there's deep core, where we are primarily spontaneously free, and we simply do what we are. And in between all these layers, in a sense, the sense of fate or compulsion is binding on the surface, and the sense of freedom is complete in the core, and everything in between. Depending on the level at which you live and from which you live, you experience greater freedom or greater binding and compulsion in life. And all of this relates to the challenge we are facing today in our current life. I'll now align it to the question of stresses. When you live on the edge, on the periphery of your personality, where you're primarily a bundle of desires, reactions, habits, you're programmed already. Given a situation, I know how you'll react, isn't it? You anticipate that of others. Well, if you are dealing with your boss, you know that when your boss gets to know this, he's going to say exactly these words. And when he starts saying those words, in your mind you're repeating what he's going to say next. It's almost like a robot. But on the other hand, when you are disengaged from the surface, closer to your center, the reaction is not there. Something hits you, you can choose to not react, you can choose to wait, and then you can choose to act in freedom precisely as needed for a given situation. That's when your actions are most effective. That's when they can resolve the situation, rather than exaggerate the problem by a bundle of reactions. That's when also you experience yourself as free. And you have also the satisfaction of what you do. You will find there are some people who are naturally always in a state of calm and quiet, even in the face of provocation. And they seem to be always in mastery of their circumstances. There are others who might be always excitable and agitated, and they're always running around trying to catch up from one crisis to another. And it's only this where you live from and where you act from. And so it's worth it for you, for all of us, to make the effort to disengage from the surface reactive I, to center yourself a little more. And the more you come to the center, the more you find you have the poise of freedom, and from there the greater mastery. And if you come all the way to the center, you have the greatest mastery and greatest freedom. So I'll give you the analogy of the wheel. Life around you is whirling like a wheel, right? Circumstances around you are whirling. Everything is in movement. Even your own personality is almost like a whirling wheel. The farther out you are on the edge of the wheel, the more fast-paced, the more you're swept away. You stand there, you can't stay still. Vroom, it pushes you. The closer you come to the wheel, the less things seem to move. And at the center of the wheel, it looks like nothing moves. But everything depends on this. The outer edge of the wheel cannot move if not for the support of the center. So the reality is this: the power center is in the center. the result of that is on the edge. So do you want to belong to the realm of the results where things are already pre-programmed, or do you want to come closer to the core where you can choose how the wheel moves? And the more you're able to come to the center, the less you're affected, buffeted by circumstances, and the less you're stressed. Stress is what happens when circumstances squeeze you and imprison you, prevent your freedom. When you disengage and come to the center, whatever happens outside, the most extreme tornado, you're in the center. You're free. And you can choose to exercise your freedom and deal with the situation without getting swayed away. And so in the long run, this is a practice one has to consciously cultivate, that you spend a little time every day where you consciously center yourself and come as deep or as close as you can to your deepest center. And from there, you look out towards life. Look at all the things you have to do during the day, during the week, during the years, doesn't matter. You look at things from that center of freedom. And naturally, automatically, spontaneously, there'll be a kind of a prioritizing. This is more important, that is less important. This is urgent, that can wait. It'll be obvious. You won't even have to think it out. And it will be, because it's the core of you, the most authentic way of arranging it. With logic, you can argue out anything. But when you see from the center, it's obvious. It transcends logic, and it's spontaneous and effortless. But every morning, spend a little time to center yourself. Many of you perhaps have a routine where you may sit down and do some prayers. That helps. But generally, the habit of prayer is the turning out. You're making a prayer either as a mechanical habit, or you're turning out towards a form or a focus external to you. The same prayer could be done with a turn inwards, where you conceive of or feel that divine presence deep within you. Or simply center yourself and use the prayer as a means of deepening the center. Or sit wordlessly without form of prayer, simply feeling deep within you the deepest core of your aspirations, or the deepest source of love or compassion, or just feel behind the sense of stillness, silence, where you simply are without doing, and remain in that for a while. And when it's thus centered, from there you turn, you will find you can re-embrace life, and with a base of stability which nothing else can equal. It's a very simple practice, but it puts you at the center of the three bodies, and therefore puts you in charge, in mastery. There's a very interesting statement which comes in the Bhagavad Gita, where it is said that in order to be master of your circumstances, samrat is the word in Sanskrit, meaning the king. In order to be master of circumstances, you must first be master of yourself. Swarat is the word. Unless you can master yourself, you cannot master your circumstances, because effectively your circumstances are a reflection or an outcome of what you are internally. In a way, all the crises out there can take place because within you there's a conflict. And when you can resolve things within you, you're able to then impact circumstances and heal those conflicts outside you. So it's a very profound idea, but you can see why it is important to do this practice of centering. Its impact on another level is even on your body, on your thoughts, and on your emotions. Because when you're in the center, and from there you move out, you are spontaneously true to yourself, but also what you bring out in your thoughts are not the old habits, the rigidities, the reactions, but a relaxed freedom. As a result, when you bring that into your body's health will improve. You bring that into your emotions, emotions will become clear and positive. Your mind will become still, clear, bright. Your power of intuition will begin to be active. Unlike intelligence, which is rationally thought out, intuition points and goes straight at the source. You see, increasingly, the nature of the world is that things are moving faster. The time given to you to make a decision is less. The information given to you is an overload. You don't have enough time to read a 100-page report in order to make a decision. And after all that, the value of the information given to you is very low. It's extremely unreliable. There's a lot of confusion out there. Nothing that you can truly trust. In this kind of an increasing chaos and urgency, and the consequence of a wrong decision is enormous. You could lose everything. In that kind of a situation, rationality is insufficient. It's good, it's useful, don't lose it, but it's insufficient. You have to back it by a deeper insight which is sure and true. We use the word intuition. But what is intuition? But a knowledge which is coming from a source that is not thought out, which cannot be corrupted. And that's in your core. The inner being's sight sees things for what they are. Just as the body can only engage with physical objects, your emotions can engage with energies, your mind can engage with ideas, your inmost soul engages with the essence of things. And when it sees a situation, instantly, effortlessly, you feel this feels right, that somehow feels not okay. Now, you don't know what it is, but you just feel it's not okay. At that point, you start using the other faculties. Your mind steps up and says, what's wrong? I feel something wrong here. Let's explore, and it finds the problem. The other side feels right, and you say, okay, I follow my feel. People speak of gut feel, but gut feel is still a reflection of the inner perception of the intuition in your body. Your body feels like fear, something disturbs me, or something feels comfortable. But that's a reflection of the true intuition. And it's a good starting point. But when you learn to become conscious and can center yourself, you'll have access to this direct sense. And this also you must cultivate. And increasingly today, it is an essential faculty, an essential requirement. Without that, nothing happens. Those who are most successful are those who have that intuitive sense. There's a very interesting experiment which was done. They had 100 CEOs in a room, and to each one of them, they gave a problem. They said, we have here in an envelope a number that's been written. And we want you have a paper in front of you, we want you to just guess, without thinking, just guess what the number is and write what you think it would be. Interestingly, the CEOs who were most close to the actual number were the ones who had demonstrated profitability in the last 1 year. The ones who were farthest from the number were the ones who had demonstrated losses in the last 1 year. Your ability to guess a number corresponds to your profitability or loss. But when you think about it deeply, it's obvious. There's the power of intuition. And when that is active, you navigate your way through the vicissitudes and instabilities of life's circumstances. When you don't have that intuition, all the rationality fails you, in spite of it giving you so many assurances. So all of this now brings us back to the big picture that I started with. We are formed of so many layers. Our core is you. And the more you become conscious of that, the more you can wield these layers and your capacities. And then life is a field of experience for learning, for growth, and self-actualization of your potential. So I think this is a very broad picture. I think commensurate to the breadth of the topic, title, Journey of Life, but seen from a deeper layer, deeper perspective. So I will pause here and invite your questions. We have covered quite a vast space, so you can ask any question regarding anything.
By the way, those that are not comfortable with asking the question, you can write it down. Someone can ask for you.
I like when you ask because I get a sense of who's asking. So tune in better. Take a moment to assimilate because these are quite deep, multifaceted ideas. Yes.
I'm not sure it is related to what you mentioned, but
Yes, feel free.
when you have such a deeper thoughts, what is depression? What causes depression?
Yes.
And what is the cure for it?
When you observe deeply, what is it that depression consists of? You will find there is a kind of a misalignment that you feel. You feel out of sorts, we say. Something is not okay. But it is at such a deep level that you don't even know how to articulate it. When does the depression go? When that misalignment gets set right. And then suddenly everything makes sense, everything becomes meaningful. So in practice, when you look at the circumstances leading to the depression, you will find that your life is going in a direction which is not in alignment with your deepest aspiration. The swabhava, temperament, or swadharma, innate drive, which I spoke of earlier. When you're doing something which is out of alignment with the deeper need of the aspiration of the soul, the whole life becomes meaningless. Although externally you appear to be successful, it's hollow. You'll be surprised how many so-called successful people are driven to suicide. Film stars and people in the theater who are so famous that you would say, oh, everybody envies them. In their own life, when they look inside them, they feel hollow. They have severe depressions. And what is it? Because they know everything they're doing is fake. The adulation they're receiving from people is for a fake personality that's out there, created for the movie. It's not me. Nobody really knows me. When I go out there to my parties or to my friends, everybody is seeing those personalities. They're seeing this successful person. I am miserable inside and no one even knows it. That gap, that hollowness which comes with it, that is what leads them into severe depression. And then many other distortions come with it. But at the core is a misalignment of what is happening in your life with your deeper aspiration and sense of purpose. And when that gets aligned, corrected, suddenly the depression goes away. And sometimes within a few days, it can be done. I don't know if that satisfies you of this or if there's something more, but this is at the core of it. It indicates the need for a major reshaping of the direction of your life. Some of that direction may involve reshaping of your internal priorities, thoughts and emotions and responses. The inner core and the outer layers are misaligned. And sometimes it means breaking some of the habits now currently set to better align them to the core within. And if you don't do anything, eventually the crushing blow of circumstances will break it for you, very painfully. If you do it consciously, then you can avoid that kind of a painful transition and make a smooth shift to what is required. But it always requires deep introspection. Yes.
Namaste. So I'll ask you two-part questions. Some of this may not be relevant. It might be foolish. You can choose to ignore it. The first part is, you talk about when the life is re-engaging, as a baby you're growing, that you are coming here for a growth of something. You're choosing environments, parents to grow something else up. But then there is also a good and bad, right? Evil part of it. When that is coming into this world, is that looking for the growth of that aspect?
Mm-hmm. Yes. We see always the
There's one more
bad
after.
and the evil as contradicting growth. And in a way, it is true. But there's a deeper truth to it. And when we view it from that perspective, you will see how it supports the growth. First of all, where does it come from? Because in the yogic perspective, we say everything is part of or expression of an underlying oneness. And that underlying oneness is divine. Right? The whole universe is just an expression of divinity. It's not created by divinity, it is an expression of divinity. The divine is immanent here. It's not separate, sitting up there. It is right here, but concealed in the forms. And what we call evolution is nothing but the gradual revealing of those possibilities of our divinity. But then where does this bad or evil come from? So the first thing we recognize, this is an expression of a consciousness that is utterly free. The divine consciousness in its core is utterly free to be and express itself in every possible way. And that's why the universe is so beautiful and so wonderful. It expresses all possibilities. Anything you can think of, you can create or will already exist somewhere because it's possible. And it's a world of possibilities and freedom. Now, when you look at the freedom, the extreme form of freedom is the freedom to oppose everything, including the divine. The freedom to oppose evolution is also part of the freedom given in this expression, right? And so the part of the universe which opposes the freedom, which opposes the evolution, and opposes freedom itself, which is part of the freedom. You see? The freedom to oppose freedom is part of the freedom. That part is what we call evil. But notice what purpose it serves, because if everything is underlying, in the underlying layer, everything is true and good, whatever the distortion and appearance, it must serve something good. And you see what happens. In evolution, whenever we reach a stage which is wonderful, you've got a perfection, a great harmony, a great achievement, you become stagnant. And it's not the highest freedom. It's not the highest perfection. It's not the highest harmony. But having got to a point well above the rest, you stop there, self-satisfied. That's when these things creep in on you and they poke you at your weakest point. They try to poke you everywhere, they fail because that's well consolidated. But when they find your weak point and hit you hard there, they break your harmony. So the first thing you say, oh my God, this evil thing came and spoiled everything. But you notice it pointed out to you your weakness, and immediately you start correcting for that. And now you rebuild on a new level, a greater harmony, stronger and more perfect. So their job, seen from this perspective, their job, and the mother uses this term, she said there's nothing evil finally. They are sensors. Their job is to point out to your weakness, and if you don't correct it, then they come to break, to force you to grow. Okay? So in practice, let's look at it this way. And that's why evolution is cyclic. We formed a team in our profession, and we formed a perfect team. We're all so well suited to each other. We work as one single whole. Everything is wonderful. And then what happens? If one person starts growing faster than the rest, it breaks the harmony already. Now he's out of sync, and the rest will pull him back. You're growing too fast. We can't keep up with it. You're out of alignment. They pull back. Any set arrangement of perfection will tend to be a block for growth. And either at that point the person feels suffocated and breaks out and says, okay, we were great together, but now I need to find my own way. And he breaks out and the harmony is broken. Or you get stagnant to a point where suddenly you realize the world has moved on, we're stuck where we were. And you need to reinvent yourself. In order to prevent precisely that kind of a lapse, these forces come and break you, poke you, compel you to keep improving, changing and growing. So if you think of it this way, everything serves in the evolutionary movement. Yes.
This explanation that you just gave, that there is an inner you and there's an outer you. How would you explain that to a teenager?
Okay. I would explain that at different ages, using different words perhaps to match their experience, but always the idea is the same. Let me give an example. There was a girl in my class. I was taking class with students at the age of 10, 11. And she was saying that, last week I couldn't come, I missed the class because I had a fever. But when I had the fever, I was praying again and again. I was praying to get well, but it didn't happen. So I looked at her and I saw this great intensity. And then I said, if you become very quiet, behind all this agitation, you'll feel inside you like a silence, like a stillness. And she became quiet and she felt, and suddenly there was this blooming smile on her face, and she said, "Oh, it's so beautiful." And I said, "That's where you pray from." It was easy. You just had to make her aware, you're upset now, just become quiet and feel behind this disturbance a stillness that's there. That was enough as a vocabulary for her. With others, you may use a different vocabulary. We speak often in the Indian context, we say, God is in your heart. That within your heart is a divine presence. And it's always there, always aware, always protecting you and helping you. But you must learn to listen to it. You must learn to call for that help. Now, just this idea implanted early on to a child, you don't even wait for them to be teenagers. Just this idea that whenever they have a difficulty, they stop, become quiet, and feel, listen to the guidance that is already there deep within, where they already know what's the right thing to do. But learn to turn in and listen. So if you have told them this and taught them this early on, then the rest of the journey, with whatever vocabulary, whatever cultural context, it'll take place smoothly. Already when they're teenage, the problem becomes more complex because they have got certain fixed ideas and rigidities. And now if you say, well, deep inside your heart is this thing, divine presence, oh yeah, but doesn't look like it, I don't feel it. There are already many blocks to the whole thing. That's why it's important to do this early on. I even encourage parents, when they sit for their morning prayers or meditation, to have their little children right there sitting with them. Maybe doing nothing. Or just tell them, just be quiet and just feel good. You make them aware that deep within their heart they feel good, they feel happy, they feel peace. And let them sit there. Get familiar with that vibe. And then as they grow older, there's a natural connection with that sensitivity deep within. And they never lose it after that. When they do something which is contrary to that, they will feel uncomfortable. And they may still experiment, but at some point they'll let go because it feels wrong deep inside. So this core of reference, if you can set very early on, it makes it easy. With teenagers, depending on how resistant they are, sometimes they may be open to just this by saying that you feel, become very quiet. Or you have to use a filter of logic, bypass their filter of logic first by making them conscious that look, what you feel within you is also in many layers. Right now you're angry, but when the anger passes, behind that you feel actually you want to be friends. You want things to be well. You have goodwill for everyone. That's you, isn't it? And they refer inside and say, yes, that's true. And deep inside, even behind that, you have deep ideals. You want the world to be perfect. You want everyone to be happy. You want somehow to contribute something worthwhile. Where does that come from? Deep inside you is already the source, where you already are all those things which you want. Just become conscious of that. And for that, you must learn to become very quiet. And train them, teach them to turn their attention inwards. And so there are many ways of approaching it, depending on the temperament of the person. I cannot give you one fixed formula, but an experience, a momentary glimpse of experience of something inside that's already there. And then the cultivating the habit of turning inwards wherever necessary or even regularly. These two things done, the rest they will find their way.
You talked about inheritance, makeup of genetic system, and also you talked about soul entering the baby, and soul may be entering from some different source, and your parents' inheritance may be influencing too.
Yes.
What dominates?
That's a very interesting question. So there are three influences.
If we can repeat the
I will
question.
repeat the question. When there is the epigenetics, the inheritance, and then there is the soul's choice when it enters and it brings its own impulsions. Which dominates? That's the question. Well, in fact, there are three influences. There is the influence of the environment, there is the influence of the hereditary and genetics, and there's the influence of the soul's choice and the conscious imprint that it brings. And all three tend to merge. Generally, a more conscious soul will choose an environment and even a heredity which is aligned to its aspiration. But even it's like it's a package deal. For one thing that you seek, something else may come which is not so useful. But there will be some alignments. Even then, when there is a conflict, if the soul asserts itself, it can overcome the other two. And this is why everything, in spite of all the opposition, human progress breaks through. In spite of the worst periods of darkness and suffocation of the human spirit, the spirit pushes through, survives, and breaks, and comes through and conquers. As you can see in the whole cycles of history. Because that has the greatest power eventually. It may take time for it to exercise its power, but when it does, it breaks through inevitably, however long it may be, however painful the transition may be. Because the universe is built inside out. Okay? So the surface things are like ripples. They are phenomenal more and more as you go out. If the core changes, the ripple effect goes all the way through. But the ripples cannot change the core. Or to put it in a different form, the Indian tradition speaks of the universe, describes it as a tree that is upside down. The roots are in the underlying unity, and from there it divides and divides and divides into branches, becoming more and more multiple in the appearance, down here on the material level. So you can cut the branches, but beyond a point you cannot go because you hit the underlying unity, and from there it can rebuild everything. So you can keep pruning the branches, you cannot touch the root. Because if you approach the root, you discover you're one with it, because that's the underlying unity. And so there's no contradiction anymore. So all the clutter, confusion, chaos, conflict is experienced only on the surface phenomenal layers. The correction from within can push its way and overcome them eventually. The question is when that eventual takes place. We are right now, just from the perspective of human evolution, in one of those passages of transition where everything is breaking down. There's a kind of a suffocating pressure on the human spirit, partly because we have programmed ourselves to be obsessed with those superficialities and to live at the level of reaction and conflict. We've programmed ourselves. We teach our children to be more and more extrovert, thinking that's good. You will be successful by being more driven and more extrovert in your drive and passion and desire. Harvard University will teach you that to be successful in business, you must always be dissatisfied. And from dissatisfaction, you must grow to greater dissatisfaction and greater dissatisfaction so that you don't stop. Because if you're satisfied, you'll stop growing. Oh, that's the teaching at least. And so you keep pushing from dissatisfaction to greater dissatisfaction until eventually you collapse with a heart attack. Here was a successful man. Well, if you start with the Indian tradition, your grandmom tells you, my child, always be satisfied with what you have. It's the very reverse philosophy. And then what drives you? The self-actuation, the self-expression of your own innate possibilities and creativities. And so your motivation is not conquering and dominating the other, it's fulfilling yourself. And when each one truly does that, we kind of fit into a tapestry of a spontaneous harmony. When you start by trying to dominate the other, you enter into conflict. You see how nature works. One plant grows, another plant grows, and they kind of enmesh themselves and support each other. Interdependence is the very essence of the whole natural evolution. The environment and the forest is so deeply interdependent that if you chop off one part, you remove one species, the whole thing breaks down, isn't it? That's the way nature naturally grows, and it's true of all of us. If all of us did what we are, if expressed ourselves truly and worked to fulfill our innate potential, we would not enter into collision. And we would find ourselves naturally aligning in complementarity, supporting each other. So, when you start being driven by an innate passion to fulfill, to realize, to be creative, then you're moving from satisfaction to greater satisfaction to greater satisfaction. And at the end of the journey, you look back and say, I had a wonderful life. So you can choose what is your prime motivation and drive. So in to out is always more powerful than a surface-driven drive. I've answered your question, I think, but also extended it beyond.
Wrapping up. Anybody?
Yes. Yes, surely.
You spoke about like the innate core having a choice to take on a physical life or a physical body. That kind of implies that that innate soul knows which life it's going to lead and how it's going to end, and as taking that somewhat conscious choice to lead that particular life. That kind of implies that just like all space exists, that implies all time exists. That implies that the future is already written for that particular soul. How does that, and that kind of fits into what some of the Einstein's relativity theory implications of that is, depending on how you move through space, light years from here, that all of past exists and all of the future exists.
Yes.
So how does that, how does your philosophy fit into that?
Okay.
Because the science shows that it's possible for all of time to exist at the same time.
Yes. So we have this concept in the yogic tradition of the reality, capital R. Not just what you see, but everything that is. And we give a name to it, we call it Brahman. Okay? The word itself is very significant in the root sounds, but for the moment we just look at this, the all, the one, the totality. And how can you know it? What is the totality of it? Everything that happened in the past and everything that could have happened in the past is all included in the whole. Everything that's happening right now and everything that could have happened right now, including the sun exploding or two planets colliding and a whale falling down from the ceiling, anything you can conceive of, everything is simultaneously existent in the whole as a possibility. And everything that could be in the future is also there. And that totality of everything that you could imagine is the one that is all, which is Brahman. That's the sense of the divine. Okay? Out of that, it's as if something moves out as a form of expression, a selection of possibilities, which becomes our experience of the world and of evolution and this physical universe. It's a bit like an author, let's say Shakespeare sits down, I'm going to write the greatest novel, the greatest play. What's in his mind? It can be everything. It can be science fiction, it can be romance, it can be thriller, it can be everything in between, and all possibilities. And then out of that infinite possibility, it coalesces to, all right, I'm going to have a protagonist who's going through an internal conflict. In this particular situation, he is assembling what becomes now for him the first focus of the play. And then within that, the specifics are filled in. And then the whole thing is sequenced in time. So sometimes he will start with the ending and then do a flashback, etc. So the universe in its emergence follows a similar process. There is the one that is all, infinite possibility. And then out of that, something comes forward and more specific, all the way down to the current physical process of our experience. And nothing is fixed. The whole universe is open. The whole future is available, all possibility. Our choice right now is forming this physical experience of reality as we go along. But yes, the possibilities exist. Okay? So there is nothing which is prefixed as a fate or a destiny except what you choose in your freedom to make your focus. Okay? So the way you look at it is this. You can say certain things are destined. Yes. Where did that destiny come from? What compels it? Your choice. So you decide, for example, that I'm going to do this tomorrow. In between, many things can come to hamper, to delay, or to prepone, to make it easier or harder. But if you have decided, you will go through a process of assembling. If the thing fails, you'll get something else, you'll find plan B, plan C, but you can get it done eventually, with variations of whatever it was within those circumstances. So the destiny is something like this for the soul. In this life, I want to experience this. How it will happen and the details are not prefixed. It's more a sense of purpose that guides, and then you navigate and you assemble the possibilities and put together and develop the experiences necessary for that growth. But if something delays it, well, I keep at it. Eventually I will get it. That's the sense of the destiny. But since that is a free choice at the deepest core, which is not known to the surface personality, you find suddenly in your life things are moving in ways that you couldn't have anticipated, and you find yourself kind of hedged and forced into a situation. Where did that come from? Well, if it was a choice of the inner being, it was inevitable. And someone who senses that will say, you are destined to be a leader. Now, whether you like it or not, you can avoid it all you want. Eventually, circumstances will hedge you in and force you into a position where you inspire or influence other people. Because that was a choice of your inner being, and it kind of circumstances are pulled to match that particular vibrational quality or that potential to help you to develop that. I will even go so far as to say, if you have that potentiality to be a great leader, unlike a casual leader, a great leader, then within you there has to be far greater development and training of your capacities. And so early on in your life, you will face a lot of challenges, a lot of problems, which will train you like you have to forge the steel. It will train you to develop all those finer nuances, develop within you an equality, detachment, a large base of personality that you can carry more with you, and so on. Any narrowness will be beaten and broken by circumstances. And so someone looks at maybe your chart or looks at your future and says, oh, this man, he will go through a very difficult passage, but he will be a great man afterwards. You see how I'm describing it? Because it was a choice made within and the potential was waiting to unfold, it calls upon itself, the circumstances. They're attracted by that particular vibration. And so that becomes your destiny. But from the soul's perspective, destiny is nothing but what it has chosen. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Then how does the theory of karma influences the rebirth of a soul?
Right. So the concept of karma is essentially a concept of action and reaction. I push hard, I get pushed back. Okay? I give a blow, I get damaged even as I break the other thing. And there's always a reaction to any action. I throw a ball, it'll bounce against the wall and come back to me. As long as it is made of my own psychological content of energy, it's a part of my consciousness, well, it'll come back to me in some form. So, although there's this freedom of the soul, as I said, as you go out on the layers, the more you go to the surface, the less the freedom is there. The more you're part of a compulsion of a chain of events, some of which you have yourself initiated 20 years ago, which now come back and hit you. The thoughts and emotions you have thrown out come back and actuate themselves through people sometimes. For example, I had a friend who, in India, sometimes the bureaucracy can be so insufferable. So he had this hatred for the bureaucracy, and he was struggling with getting certain clearances for his project. And the guy refused, and he was a very nasty fellow. So I told my friend, you need to change your strategy. First, get rid of this hatred. You must sit there and consciously think of this man. He has a family. He has his pain. He hates his job. He is suffering inside. Have a little compassion for him. And then you can extend that compassion to an affection, and a genuine affection. Here's a guy who's so miserable that he makes everyone else miserable. What a poor fellow. And let that love and compassion flow to him. And then you go to his office and say, look, my friend, I know you have a very difficult job. I know my clearance is very unimportant for you, but I have nothing else. My business can't move until you give me the clearance. I'll sit here the whole day. I'll wait till you give the clearance. But you do it with genuine affection. And he did that. He sat there 3 days, and the third day the man called him and gave him his clearance. And he said after that he became the best of friends with that man. But he reversed the balance of the energetic relationship. You might say the same thing in different terms. The negative karma he neutralized with positive karma. We're just using a different vocabulary to describe this. The point being, for the soul, karma is only one of the circumstances through which it has to work. But it is not a compulsion. It can even override the karma. Remember, the waves on the surface of the ocean, that's the karma, that's superficial phenomena. If the ocean tightens the water, it can still the waves instantly. And the soul's influence imprinting on circumstances can withhold and change even, if that influence is strong enough. If your own influence is not strong enough, as it is not for most of us, we still have the power to invoke a greater power. Ask for help. Because the one that is all, the divine consciousness, is presiding over and is immanent in everything. You have a crisis that you are unable to manage, ask for the help. And in your call and the intensity and genuineness of your call, the more you're centered, the more clear it is. In the intensity and genuineness of your call is instantly the response felt. The response may not always be the way you seek. You ask for help, and if the wisdom sees, well, this problem is useful for your growth, it will give you the strength to go through the problem. It may not take it away. If it sees that the problem is unnecessary, it will suddenly diminish and the problem might fizzle out. That depends. So you ask for the wisdom and the strength, and you can ask for anything else, and the help is there in whatever form it may actualize. And we must call on it, and that is a greater power than karma. You see, karma becomes exaggerated in importance if you pay an exaggerated importance to it. And this is what happened historically in India with the emergence of Buddhism. Buddhism removed the reality of the divine and the soul, saw everything therefore purely as processes of nature. And now obviously the machinery of nature becomes all important, and karma becomes exaggerated in importance. But if you bring back the soul as the center and the divine as the origin of all things, the freedom predominates, and it can modify or override the karma in 3 ways. First, you can freely create a positive karma to neutralize the negative, and things change. Second, you shift your level of consciousness. I threw the ball in anger, the bundle of energy comes back, but meanwhile, if I have become free of that, I have moved on. It cannot hit me, it cannot catch me anymore. You are free of the karma you created at the level at which you were when you move on. And third, you can invoke a greater power than you, which can erase, modify, or re-divert that same negative energy to serve a positive outcome. And so we have to put ourselves consciously on the side of the aspect of the freedom and the sense of the divine help, support, and protection in our journey. And then the rest are all means, and we don't give them an exaggerated place.
You are such a good speaker that you help people like us that are above 50, and we get to understand what life is all about. You should influence the younger kids now.
I do meet with all ages.
Do this kind of seminars in colleges.
Yes, I do that also once in a while. The thing is this, for me, the interaction with groups is one of the things I do. And I do meet with young people, even with little children, age of 8, 9, 10 onwards, all ages.
Speaking of millennials, Mother Shirbando say that we're evolving as a species.
Yes, yes.
But many folks look at millennials and say we're probably not evolving, we're stagnating or going backwards. We have some unique millennials here that are here, but it's only 3. Are we losing the inclination for the truth, or are we? What's the situation?
Actually, we're seeing a very interesting transition where many of the old values, structures, and systems are breaking down, and something very different is emerging. And in between, there's a kind of a vacuum or a mixed passage, which is confusing. The previous age was formed out of the rational mind, rationally organizing life, and promising you utopia on the basis of reason. You see, you go back 50 years or 100 years, and science says, with the development of science and technology, we will bring peace in the world, we'll bring harmony, we'll solve all problems, there'll be nobody who will be hungry, there'll be no poverty, everyone will have all these wonderful gadgets, and everyone will be happy. In practice, what you see is with the development of these possibilities of technology and all that, and organizations, the reverse has happened. The more we have organized, the more people have got suffocated, the less their freedom they experience, and the more conflicts seem to increase. So it's not by rational organization that you will realize what is the deeper aspiration. It will be on a shift of consciousness. Unless you and I change, are more centered in our core rather than in the reactive space, we will not be able to be in harmony. When we are all centered in our core, we will spontaneously, effortlessly fall into harmony, isn't it? And so that's the correction that the transition is, so to say, compelling on humanity. When everything fails, what do? You turn in, because there's nothing else left to look forward to. You start introspecting, you start wondering, asking questions, and recasting yourself inside out. So we are in that passage. The error would be to stop short and say, I will do what I want. I don't care for anyone else. The correction will be to go deeper to what is that I that really wants, and what does it really want, and you go all the way in. Then suddenly things fall into place. And when that happens in a large enough group, you will have the beginning of the new age, and a spontaneous harmony, and what we call utopian ideals, many of those will begin to form spontaneously. In between is this passage. And now looking at the young kids today, what you see is old structures broken, a rebellious tendency even to break anything imposed on them, an attempt to do what they want. But at first it's desire driven. I'll do what I like, who are you to impose on me? And at some point that fails. And either they go deeper within or they get lost. If you have done your part as a parent soon enough, then the deeper sensitivity is there, then they find their way to navigate and develop a new framework of life which is more spontaneously true to their aspiration. A few are doing that, many are still in the confusion passage. But the other thing which you notice is most of them are aware of something inside them. They know that they're looking for something which they have not yet got. And there's a kind of a sense of, not this, but I don't know what. If at that point you can offer an experience of something that touches, they immediately catch it. So in my engagements with the young people, this is what I try to do. I try to find, depending on their orientation and interest, something which can create an experience of that contact. And then they say, oh yeah, this makes a lot of sense. This is what we want more of. And the rest happens easily. But you have to do it through the filter of rationality. You cannot do it through the filter of an imposition. You do this because I have done it, or my grandma said you should do it. That doesn't work. You have to explain why. So I did this once with a group of students, I think it was age 10 to 18 in a school. There are about 1,000 children. And I spoke to them about the science behind rituals. You know, in India we have a lot of rituals associated with different things, and many of them don't make sense to you. So I started with this and brought a deeper sense of why, how, what's happening behind the scenes, and it made a lot of sense. And so a week down, I got a phone call from the principal. We're getting phone calls from all the parents. So I said, oops, what did I just do? And then she said, the parents are called up because they said earlier we used to try to teach the children what to do, and now they're teaching us how to do it. You see, when you catch the rational frame, it makes sense, they will go for it. But if it's just an imposition which does not make rational sense, they want to filter it out, because the impulse is to get free of the things which were suffocating human progress. And this takes that form if you just impose like that. And unfortunately, as parents, we are ourselves not equipped to present the rational or deeper truth behind these things. You see, most of what I have spoken to you today, I put it in a context that it made sense. It was belonged to a rational framework. It made sense. Where necessary, backing it with objectified scientific explorations or evidences of some kind. And then the whole thing becomes reasonable. Once the mind's filter is passed, then the heart opens very easily for these young people. And we have to use that passage. There's also another challenge, which is the nature of the transition. The individuality is coming forward much more. Because what we are passing through is an age of individualism and reason to an age which is of intuition. In between is a reason and individuality which is dissatisfied with its own rationality. And so you have to accept the need of their individuality and support them not by enforcing. You did that because your parents forced it on you, but they can't do that for the same reason. And so you have to be there as a friend rather than as a trainer. And create space where they feel free. Invite them to discuss with you if they feel like. Be there for them, but in a different relationship. Even sometimes children at the age of 5 or 6, some of them will behave like adults almost. And you have to respect that and treat them as adults. And then they respect you back. Yes.
Think about the rebirth.
Mm-hmm.
Suppose if I channelize all my energy every day, 30 minutes or so, and think about that's what I want to do my next birth, can it happen?
So it's not so much how much energy you put. It's rather the choice that you make when you're preparing to transition. And you don't have to do it intensely. For the soul's choice, it's a spontaneous thing. Oh yeah, this is what will be interesting. So what you're doing is more on the surface of the personality, trying to impose a fixed idea. But is that really what your deepest core wants? So I would rather, instead of focusing on what you want to do next, because it's not what you might choose even at the end of it, you focus on what you want to do now. So at the age of 60, my mother said, all my life I have been serving. First it was so and so, then it was so and so on. And now I want to do certain things which I couldn't do before. So I said to her, all right, I look after the house, you go and you be the teenager. So she started to learn, at the age of 60, she started to learn dancing, singing, painting, calligraphy, theater, swimming, all kinds of things, as far as her body could take. And after a few years, certain things dropped off automatically. She said, been there, done that now. And there was a narrowing of her focus. But that allowed her to grow in the way that was waiting. And so I would say that you're even thinking of your next life and what you want to do is a sign that there's something you want to do now. Don't wait for the next. Begin it now. Start doing the things which you feel helpful. And none of it needs to be done as a career or to win marks. You see, from childhood you've been programmed. If you take up something, you must be good at it and you must come first and you must have this certificate at the end. None of that matters. It's your growth and your enjoyment. Take up playing an instrument of music. Do it for a few weeks. As far as you will go that it's interesting and enjoyable for you. Then leave it and move to something else and something else. Do whatever you feel you will enjoy, in which you will experience some kind of growth, however briefly. And eventually you'll find certain things will stay, other things will fade out. And you'll find your new forms in your life. So the fact that you're thinking like this is to me a sign that you need to start it now.
Last question. Anybody has a... Okay. Did somebody else have one too? Maybe you both ask it and we'll take the better one.
He's been asking for a while, so we'll do two more.
We'll do two more. Yeah.
Two last questions.
Right. Namaste. So this has to do with your talk on sending out positive thoughts and energy. And so as I glance on Sri Aurobindo's picture, I'm thinking of his leaving England and coming back to India. His goal was to reestablish the culture in India. He felt it was being suppressed. And if he could do it, or if he could have done it without seeking help, like, he joined a radical group and had all these people that he taught or inspired how he can achieve his goal of bringing freedom to India in a peaceful way. Could he have done it the way you have said just now, sending out positive energy? Now, I know about him getting imprisoned and he was not responsible, but in a way he was, because he was inspiring other people. So that's my question, if it makes sense.
So when you are engaging with the world, you have three bodies, three levels of engagement. In your thoughts, in your emotions, and in your actions in the body. All three need to be engaged if you want to really have a worthwhile outcome. You cannot engage with all circumstances on all three levels. Like, for example, right now there's a war going on in the Middle East. You cannot go physically help, perhaps. But there you can send your goodwill, your love, and prayers for peace. So there you will engage on that level. But if right now there is something that's broken, you can't send love and goodwill and wait for it to get fixed. You need to step up to it and do it with your own hands. So on many levels, you will engage according to what's possible within those circumstances. Sri Aurobindo, when he came back to India, India was under colonial rule, and the only organized group was pleading with the colonialists for better rule. No one even dreamt freedom was possible. And so you said radical, yes. So Sri Aurobindo came and said, we need to have complete freedom. And the reason he gave was very interesting. It's not because we hate the British. It's not because they're bad rulers or good rulers. That's irrelevant. What he foresaw was India had a role to play in the world as a nation, as a culture and civilization. But in order for India to fulfill that role, she had to first find herself, discover her soul. And for that, she needed to be free. And so it's not out of hatred. It's because there is a higher purpose to be fulfilled. And so when he fought the British, it was not out of hatred also. He said it's because this is a necessary thing to have the freedom. Now this statement you can apply to any one of us. If we are to fulfill our rightful role in life and in the world, we have to first find ourselves. Otherwise, you'll just be busy repeating what was programmed into you. That's not your role. So you have to find yourself and go deep to really find your soul, whatever degree you can. For that, you must be free. You cannot introspect and find and draw out your innate potential if you don't have a free space to be able to experiment and exercise that potential, right? So every child, if at every step that a child makes, you stop and say, no, that's wrong, no, not this, not this, you'll just be programming a robot. You have to allow him freedom, including the freedom to make mistakes. And he will learn on his own. And that's really the requirement for all of us. And that's why when you look at yourself, don't worry if you make mistakes, that's fine. You're learning. But start making a conscious effort to act from a deeper poise in all you do. That was Sri Aurobindo's work.
So I see that whole talk is going towards what we were, where we are, and where we're going forward from here. So I'll take the question towards that as well. That we were born, we died, we re-engaged.
No, we don't ever die, remember?
Sorry, we re-engaged. We re-engaged. You shed the body, we shed the cloth, and then we re-engaged into the growth of the self, the Brahman. But the final goal, I mean, I still understand the goal is to do, in yogic terms, moksha, right? So that you do karma. We had a question of rebirth. But when you do a rebirth and you do karma, you do plus and minus, debits and credits to your balance book, do you carry that forward to the next?
Okay. So actually there are several issues which you have raised, and I'll touch upon them only briefly. First of all, this karma as a balance book, where good deeds, bad deeds kind of get matched. In reality, the psychological domain is very fluid. It's not like physical objects, where you can gather so many coins and then so many holes into which you fit the coins. The psychological domain is very fluid. You put out an energy of anger. It went and tried to act for a while. But the energy is like a cloud, it dissipates. It's only when you have repeated outbursts of anger that it creates a formation that tends to sustain. Similarly, you felt good, you radiated goodwill, it spread out like a cloud. It added a little bit. But when you put out in a sustained way an energy of positive optimism, that builds for a lasting or deeper impact. So the things there are not mathematical. If I give you a slap, doesn't mean you have to give me a slap. It fizzles out in things. You forget it, it doesn't matter. And so we should not think in terms of balance books. Rather in terms of energies flowing, almost like fluids. And it's only things which are sustained which tend to have that build up. And there also, as I discussed earlier, there are higher powers above the karmic, which are of a much larger impact, much larger imprint. If not for that, we would be stuck in a meaningless cycle of wanting always to catch up with the mess that we created, creating more mess in the process, and so you're kind of stuck unendingly. So you clear the way now, look at the larger, bigger picture, and then things are much simpler. But the question still remains, where is it all heading? What's it for? And you use the word moksha, which means liberation, freedom. In a way, the journey upwards, if you just continue projecting, is growing in consciousness, growing in potentiality until you reach a degree that is a complete expression of a spontaneous freedom that is already innate to you. So that would be moksha. But that's not all. As you grow, what's happening is you're expressing deeper and higher possibilities of your consciousness. So there's a growing wisdom, there's a growing power of knowledge, there's a growing and spontaneous effectiveness of action, of power, of love, of beauty, of harmony. In other words, expression of divinity. The more you grow, the more you're in alignment to the divine possibilities within you, and the more you're expressing those in your life. Look at a person who's less grown. He's all about a narrow, small center of limited, ignorant incapacities. What's somebody who has evolved? Something that's wide, with greater knowledge, greater power of action, greater sense of engagement, connection, harmony, love, whatever words you use here. And even in their actions and in their forms, expressing a beauty. So there are actually 4 instruments in our being for expression. Our mind is an instrument of knowledge, and its perfection is when it widens out to include all knowledge, omniscience. Our life energy is an instrument of power, of energizing, and when it grows, its fulfillment is in omnipotence, all power. Everything is possible, almost effortlessly in its capacity. Our body is an instrument of form, and what is its perfection? A radiance of beauty and harmony. And our soul is an instrument of the underlying oneness that is an expression of love. So our journey, which is growing into an increasing liberation is an incidental goal, not the primary goal. The primary goal is the manifestation of our divinity in a divine knowledge, omniscience, omnipotence, divine power, divine beauty and harmony, and a divine love growing in life, engaging with each other in a divine life itself. And the evolutionary journey is towards this. And that's the reason the universe was formed, to fulfill this expression of divinity in life. So think of it this way, rather than a freedom in which you get out, the goal is a manifestation here in life. Everything you do in your work, in your personal life, in your professional life, in your community life, aim for the growth of these things. Growing love, growing beauty, growing harmony, growing knowledge. And then you're fulfilling your life and the purpose for which we all came here. We'll end with this, and I would suggest we have a short concentration just to center ourselves and assimilate all that we have dwelt upon so that it may remain deep within our heart as a gift that we can draw upon in the years to come.